The first thing Rosie felt was the sting of rough rope cutting into her wrist. She had been dragged into a dim shack at the edge of the prairie. Her hair was tangled with dust. Her dress was torn and smeared with mud. The man in front of her was Clay Mercer, a tall figure with a crooked smile and eyes that burned with cruelty. On the table between them lay a sheet of paper with a forged seal. Clay slammed his hand down on it and barked, "Sign this and your suffering ends." Rosie shook her head. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out at first. When she finally found her voice, it was a whisper. "I will not." Clay leaned closer. His breath reeked of whiskey and smoke. "You think you have a choice, girl." He lifted a branding iron from the fire and let the glowing tip hover inches from her skin. Rosie recoiled in terror. The smell of burning metal filled her nose and she whimpered. Her arms were bound tight behind her back. The chair under her creaked as she struggled. Clay grinned with satisfaction. "You sign or you hang." He shoved the paper against her chest and pressed the hot iron against the wood beside her head. Sparks flew. Rosie flinched. Tears streaked her dirt-covered face. She prayed for someone to hear her. No one came. With a violent jerk, Clay dragged her out of the shack. The prairie sun hit her eyes like ore. The dry wind tore her dress as he marched her to a solitary tree. He tossed a coil of rope over a branch and pulled her upright. The coarse fibers bit into her waist as he bound her arms tight against her body. Her bare feet left the ground. She hung in the blazing light, swaying like a broken doll. Clay stepped back and admired his work. "This is justice for a girl who dares defy me." Rosie gasped for air. The rope constricted with every shallow breath. Her shoulders screamed with pain. A sharp bruise was already forming where the cord cut into her skin. Her mind spun. Her heart pounded. Every second felt like the end. She thought of the family she had lost. She thought of the life she might never live. The world blurred into heat and fear. Clay circled her like a vulture. "You will sign when you cannot stand the agony any longer." Her voice cracked as she cried out, "Please." Her body twisted helplessly in the wind. The prairie stretched endlessly around her. No town, no lawman, no friend to come. Only the sound of the rope groaning above her head and the cruel laugh of her captor. At that moment, Rosie felt smaller than she had ever been. Her dignity stripped, her hope fading, her voice almost gone. And yet she whispered into the emptiness, "I will give you everything. Just let me live." Her words vanished on the wind, but something deep inside told her she was not finished. Her story could not end on this tree. But if no one came, who would ever know the truth? Who would dare to face Clay Mercer and pull her down before it was too late? And if that someone came, would he risk his own soul for a broken girl? Or would he leave her to swing in silence? The prairie wind howled through the branches of that lonely tree. Rosie's body dangled like a rag doll, twisting a little each time the rope creaked. Her lips moved in silent prayer. Her words were too weak to carry far, but they carried just far enough. From across the field, a rider slowed his horse. The man sat tall in the saddle, his face weathered by years of sun and dust. Harlan Reed had seen plenty of cruelty in his 56 years, but the sight before him still hit like a punch to the chest. A young girl strung up and left to suffer. Not even the coyotes deserve that kind of end. He pulled the reins and his old bay mare snorted, stamping her hooves on the dry ground. Harlan slid from the saddle, boots sinking into the brittle grass. He did not rush. He moved steady, his hand already wrapped around the handle of the bowie knife that never left his belt. Rosie saw him through the haze of pain. Her eyes widened. For the first time all day, there was a flicker of hope. Her lips trembled, and she forced out the words, "I will give you everything. Just save me." Harlan did not answer right away. He studied the knots that Clay Mercer had tied. They were tight, mean knots meant to cut into flesh. Harlan set the edge of his knife against the rope. One clean slice and the line snapped. Rosie dropped, but he caught her under the arms before her feet hit the dirt. She was light, too light. He could feel every bone through the thin fabric of her torn dress. Her shoulder was swollen and her knees scraped raw. She shook all over, clinging to him like a child. "You are safe now," he said. His voice was rough but steady. Her tears wet his shirt, but she did not let go. Somewhere behind them, a dry branch cracked. The sound made the mare toss her head and snort again. Harlan stiffened. He knew that sound. It was not the wind. He laid Rosie gently against the tree trunk and raised his eyes. Out from the brush stepped Clay Mercer, a revolver hanging loose in his hand, and that crooked smile stretched wide. So the old rancher thinks he is a hero. Clay sneered, cutting down my prize before I had my fun. Harlan shifted his weight and kept his knife low by his thigh. His eyes never left Clay. The air grew heavy. The rope at Rosie's feet was the only proof she had been seconds from death. Clay pointed the gun at Harlan and took a slow step forward. Let her crawl back in the dirt. Walk away and I might let you live. The prairie held its breath. Would Harlan take the deal or stand his ground against a man half his age with a loaded gun? And what price would Rosie pay for his choice? Clay's revolver stayed pointed right at Harlan's chest. The sun burned down and the prairie seemed to shrink until it was just the three of them. Rosie clutched the torn fabric of her dress, and prayed the rancher would not step back. But Harlan did not flinch. He stood tall, knife still low at his side, eyes steady. Put that gun away, Clay, he said, or you will be answering to the law by sundown. Clay laughed hard enough to spit dust. The law? You think the law cares about some runaway girl and an old man with too many gray hairs? He stepped closer, the hammer of the revolver clicking back. Rosie gasped. She thought her heart might leap out of her chest. But Harlan's voice stayed calm. You tied her up. You branded papers that are not worth the ink on them. That is kidnapping. That is fraud. You may fool a few drifters, but you will not fool a judge. Clay's smile faded just a little. His eyes darted to Rosie. You told him, did you? Rosie shook her head quickly, but the truth was in her eyes. Clay cursed and lifted the revolver higher. In that breathless moment, Harlan shifted one step to the side, one flick of his arm. The knife blade caught the sun as it flew. It struck Clay's hand just enough to knock the gun loose. The revolver tumbled into the grass. Clay lunged, but Harlan was faster. A quick shove and the outlaw was face down in the dirt. Harlan pressed a knee into his back and tied his wrists with the same rope he had cut from Rosie's body. For the first time, Rosie felt the weight of freedom. She staggered to her feet, clutching Harlan's arm for balance. Clay spat and cursed, but the fight was gone from him. Harlan pulled him upright. We take him to the marshal. We let the law see his face and his lies. Rosie nodded through her tears. Her voice was soft but clear. Thank you. Without you, I would have been gone. I will give you everything I have left. If you will only stay beside me. Harlan looked at her with something more than pity. It was respect and maybe the beginning of something else. The prairie wind carried that moment like a promise. If you're still listening, friend, this story is only getting started. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you do not miss what happens next. Because the truth is Clay Mercer is not done yet. And in the next part, he will try one last time to tear Rosie away from the only man who dared to fight for her. The sun was already sliding toward the western hills when Harlan tied Clay to the saddle of his mare. Rosie walked beside them, still weak, but steadier than before. She kept glancing at Clay, afraid he might break loose, but the rope was tight, and Harlan knew his knots. Every step toward the marshal's office felt like a step toward justice. Rosie tried to smile, but the bruises on her face pulled at her skin. Do you think the law will really listen to me? She asked. Harlan nodded without looking at her. You have your word, and you have me to back it. That is enough. For the first time, Rosie let herself believe she might truly be safe. They reached the edge of an old lumber yard just as the light turned orange. Harlan slowed the mare and scanned the shadows. His instincts never failed him. Something was wrong. The boards stacked high made good cover. The air was too quiet. Even the windmill nearby had stilled. He stopped walking. Rosie froze at his side. Then it happened. Clay twisted suddenly and knocked himself off the saddle. The rope loosened just enough for him to slip free. In a blink, he had a knife in his hand. Rosie screamed. Harlan spun around and drew his own blade. The two men circled each other among the piles of timber. Clay's eyes were wild. This girl belongs to me. You cannot keep her from me. Harlan's voice was firm. She belongs to no one but herself. Clay lunged. Steel clashed in the fading light. One wild slash cut across Harlan's shirt, missing his chest by an inch. It was not a long fight, but it was brutal. Rosie backed against the wall of the lumbershed, watching every move. Clay slashed and cursed, but Harlan held his ground. At last, Harlan caught Clay's arm, twisted hard, and sent the knife skidding across the dirt. He shoved Clay down and pressed him to the ground once more. Rosie ran forward and picked up the fallen blade with shaking hands. For a moment, she held it high, her chest heaving, her eyes burning with rage, but she dropped it. She turned away, tears streaming. "I will not be like him," she whispered. Harlan bound Clay tighter than before and pulled him to his feet. The outlaw spat blood and swore revenge, but Harlan's jaw was set. This time there would be no escape, or so they thought, because Clay Mercer still had one last trick hidden up his sleeve. Clay Mercer struggled in the dirt, his wrists bound tight, his chest heaving with rage. The last of the daylight painted the sky red as fire. Rosie stood close to Harlan, her hand resting on his arm, the fear in her eyes slowly giving way to relief. For the first time, she felt the weight of survival lift from her shoulders. She was no longer just a victim tied to a tree. She was alive because someone chose to stand for what was right. The marshal's men arrived before darkness swallowed the yard. Clay cursed and fought, but it was no use. He was hauled away, shouting promises of revenge that faded into the night. Rosie watched in silence. Her body was battered and bruised, but her spirit was not broken. She turned to Harlan, her voice trembling, but strong. "When I thought I was finished, I said I would give you everything. But what I have left is not mine to give. My life is my own. And you gave it back to me." Harlan looked at her with quiet pride. "You keep that strength. That is worth more than gold. No one can take it from you." They walked back toward the ranch under a sky lit with stars. The land felt wide and free again. Rosie held her head higher than before. She knew she could never erase what had happened, but she could build something new. And beside her walked a man who proved that courage is not about age or strength. It is about standing tall when others would turn away. Maybe that is the lesson for all of us. How often do we look the other way when someone needs a hand? How often do we choose silence when we should speak truth? And if one day we are the ones bound and left alone, who will come for us? Rosie found her answer in Harlan Reed. But each of us must ask, who will we be when the moment comes?